Alright, the Sony A9. Is it worth the price? Um, I just want to point out I make these videos because I'm passionate about photography and I enjoy talking about it. The guys at the camera store I go to would tell you that for sure. um, is this worth the price? Well, I think there's a few things that need to be considered when you're talking about is something worth something, especially a camera. One is obviously build quality, reliability, um, but one thing that doesn't always get talked about is what does it like considerably help your workflow? Um, how does it enhance your workflow? Will it make you more money? Because if you're a professional using this, that's what you're doing. Um, you're using this because you believe that it will help you and help you make more money. Um, so there's that. But first, let's start with reliability, things like that. There's a lot of things about this overheating that you'll find if you look for it. Um, I went to my camera store and I asked them. Actually, the first thing they said when I brought it in was like, "Don't bring that in here. It'll cause a fire." And I was like, "Okay." And I was like, "Okay. Have you guys actually had anybody bring any A9s back to the store?" And they said no. And he's like, it's one thing that, it's funny what he said. It's funny what will happen when somebody posts something, and he's right. Because I'm gonna compare it to this. It's ridiculous, but here in America, and I don't know if there's anybody watching anywhere else, but we had this thing with like clowns that all of a sudden like people were seeing clowns everywhere dressed up and like bothering people or just acting scary. It was weird. And like it was one incident and then all of a sudden you just started seeing it pouring in for like a month or two where you just nonstop, oh my gosh, there's clowns everywhere. um well, I kind of pertain it to that where like if one thing gets mentioned about a Sony camera overheating, it gets overblown a lot. um Now, that being said, I do think they could have made this bigger. This is the fastest camera on Earth. As far as processing and things like that, there's no other camera that does what this camera does as fast as it does it. Um, at this full frame equivalent. So that needs to be considered as well. It's a sports car. It's fast and it creates heat. So as far as that, it will probably heat up a little bit. Will it overheat? It just depends what you are doing. Um, I highly advise do this. Rent the camera. Use it for what you would be using it for in the harshest conditions that you would use it for. Not just, oh, let's throw this thing in the oven and see if it overheats. Well, no crap. So use it realistically with what you would be using it for in the worst condition that you might be using it for. Okay. Like mine would be an outdoor wedding during the summer. That would be my situation with the worst case scenario for this. Um, Try that, and if it overheats and it lets you down, then don't don't get it. But I don't think that's going to be the case in most situations. I don't. Um, so that's for the reliability. I want to talk about that because people are saying, oh, they should recall this camera and all that kind of stuff. Um, for the price, they should recall it. Sony needs to make up for this. One thing they need to do is take note, like other companies do when their products have any sort of problem. When Samsung had a problem with their phone overheating and causing fires, that was a huge problem because that was actually causing fires. It wasn't just shutting down, it was causing fire. They brought that off the market and they did fix that, and they fixed it with their next iteration as well of phones. So you have to be quick acting with Nikon. Their whole oil on the sensor thing like that with the D600, they came out with the D610 and replaced those. So it's not like Sony's the only one who's had problems with bringing out a camera to market and having it kind of have those problems. Sony has, I will say, consistently had ones that are overheating. Um, but if you look at it, um, like it's not everybody, it's not all the time. I'm not really excusing it, but like I said, it just depends what you're gonna use it for. If you're gonna use it for um, sports, action, and wildlife, um, test it out. Test it out. That's what I recommend. So okay, I've covered that. It took too long to cover that. The next thing is, I was talking about um, how will it help you um, make better images for your customer. Um, that's what I had to consider. How will this help me improve my workflow? Well, one, the eye autofocus on this thing makes taking portraits incredibly fast. So the only thing I have to worry about with this is composition and lighting. I don't have to worry about getting the eyes in focus ever with this right now. Um, Now, for tracking, I haven't really done tracking with the eye autofocus. I've done a little bit of it, and it seemingly worked pretty well. Will I use eye autofocus tracking with a bride coming down the aisle? Uh, Probably not until I test it out in just having somebody walk towards me and test that out first. Um, but again, at 20 frames per second, you're never going to miss the first kiss. I can guarantee you that. Um, the electronic shutter is incredible for that. So you're not going to miss that. You're not going to miss shots like you might with other cameras with this camera at 20 frames per second. And no blackout. So that's one thing. The eye autofocus, like I said, is stellar. For me, that helps me improve my workflow because then I can get the shot, get the pose, get the shot, get the lighting right, and it helps get your shoots done quicker. And and in the end, if you're buying something this expensive, you're out to make money at some point. And if you're not, then you're just a really high end enthusiast with a lot of money. However, I'm not that, so the intention with this is to make money. Um, so that has to do with the workflow of that. And since I can see what I am shooting before I shoot it, that always helps. That's an EVF, not necessarily an A9 advantage. So the other thing would be, the ecosystem. And I know a lot of people have talked about Sony lenses. There's not enough lenses. Well, you can adapt pretty much any lens to this camera. First off, like if you shoot Canon, you could easily shoot Canon on this thing with an adapter, no problem, easily, and it would work fantastic. I tested a few lenses with a 6300 and they all worked amazing, and this is a much faster camera than that. So I have to imagine they would work incredibly well on this system. But that's not why I got this. The lenses. The lenses. If I were to not go with this lens, if I did not want the great, incredible lenses, I would have gone with the A99 too. Because that camera is really fantastic. It fits my hand well. The sensor on that is incredible as well. But the lenses, they're just so, these G Master lenses, unless you've tried them, don't hate on Sony's lenses because they are insane. 11 aperture blades in this 85 millimeter 1.4. Their 70 to 200 has 11 aperture blades, and their 16 to 35 that they're coming out with in August has 11 aperture blades. Those are the 3 lenses I plan on owning. I already have one of them. So all 3 of my primary lenses are going to have 11 aperture blades for insanely creamy bokeh, which is one thing I also wanted. And also the lenses are insanely sharp. If you're paying that much for a lens, you want it to be sharp, and it should be sharp. But one thing that Sony did that nobody else has done is put that many aperture blades in their really high-end lenses like that. So I'm going to be rocking out 3 lenses with 11 aperture blades. To me, that's incredible. This 85G Master has just blown me away. Like, it's incredible. So the ecosystem, for me, is incredible, and it's exactly what I wanted. The only thing that kind of compares is Canon's 16 to 35 f2.8 I've heard is insanely sharp. I know their 70 to 200 is really good, and their 85 1.2 people love that lens. And it will give you definitely more bokeh than this lens. It is not as sharp. Even if you stop it down, it will not be as sharp as this lens. So it just depends what you want. If you want the ultimate creamy background, even though that has less aperture blades, it will still blow out the background considerably more than this will. But to me, it's not all just about that. I did want a sharp lens, because on my 56 1.2 for my Fuji, that was the only downside to that lens, was it wasn't very sharp. And so I wanted something that was really sharp, that I could count on shooting wide open and get the sharpness, which I couldn't with that. So the ecosystem to me is incredible. Zeiss makes their lenses as well. So people who talk about like lens, oh my gosh, you can't beat Canon and Nikon lenses. Well, Zeiss? I think Zeiss lenses are just as good or better. In fact, my buddy, I had the 24 to 70 f2.8 Zeiss Sony lens for my A99 II, and he constantly told me how sharp that lens was, and he had the 70 to 200 for his Canon 5D Mark II. So, and he was like, man, I wish I could adapt that to my camera. So I just want to talk about that. And in the first place too, this price bracket of camera is going to be out of most people's worth it range anyway. If you're considering a camera this expensive, you know whether or not you're pretty serious about it. Because a D5, a D4S even, and then also the 1DX Mark II are all insanely expensive. I would own none of those cameras if I was in Nikon. I'll tell you what I'd shoot. If I shot Nikon, I'd shoot a D750. If I shot Canon, I'd shoot a 5D Mark IV. And I wouldn't even worry about the higher speed with those. The reason why I went with this is because there's things that I need for weddings, like the dual SD card slots. I wanted full frame image quality. You can only get that with Sony with mirrorless, and that's something that like people don't think about either. Is they're the only ones offering it. If Fuji had offered a full frame mirrorless, I would have considered that for sure. But they don't, and so you're pretty much stuck with Sony if you want full frame mirrorless, which isn't a bad thing because the technology in this camera is just mind-blowingly good. So worth it. Is a 1DX Mark II worth it? Is a D5 worth it? No, for most people, no. No, but the people who use them, it is. And they know why it is. You get the extra frame rate. You get the slightly better autofocus in Canon's thing, because Canon, I think, uses the same autofocus system relatively in their 5D4 that they use in their 1DX, which is why I would even consider that. Um, so, is it worth it compared to those cameras? It undercuts them by at least $1,500. So, in my opinion, absolutely. And then you also have to consider, what does this bring to the table that the others don't? The other camera systems might not. This brings new technology that's never been used before in any camera. Um, with the electronic shutter, the way it is, and how it performs, no other camera in the world can do what this can, especially on full frame with electronic shutter. So people need to realize that too. If you're offering a technology that nobody else has, and can't offer the same way, um, then you can charge more if you want, technically. And I've seen people complain about the mechanical shutter on this, saying it should be a higher, less laggy, things like that. I don't disagree with the less lag per se. I will say, if you're using high speed, if you're using the 5 frames per second, I would just say use the electronic shutter, because that's what this camera was made for, is the electronic shutter. Now the mechanical shutter is rated at 500,000 actuations, which is a ton. So when I do my portraits and stuff like that, I'm using flash. Yes, I use that. Any other situation, I use the electronic shutter. And also, it is something you have to get used to, because it's really weird shooting with electronic shutter, and being able to count on that as an actual viable way to shoot. This is the first camera that you can, and so it's really weird. It feels like you're cheating somehow. Like it shouldn't be able to do that. So it's something you have to get used to, but worth it. I mean, to me, yes, absolutely. Um, so everything is based off of what your is worth it for you. You know, people want to put this general "is it worth it" type tag on something, and I don't think that's necessarily the right thing, because what's worth it to me might not be worth it to you, and what's worth it to you might not be worth it to me. Take a Canon T5 for example. Would it be worth it for me to buy a Canon T5 and buy the best glass possible for it, and then use that instead, um, and save tons of money, but not get the images that I want from it? Ultimately, the customer has to be happy with the images first and foremost, but you also have to be happy with the images. You're the ones taking the pictures. I'm an artist first, actually. I did art before I did photography. So every time I take pictures, I'm looking for the artistic side of that picture. I want my pictures to look the way I want them to. These lenses allow me to do that with this camera like nothing else I've ever used. So is that worth it to me? Absolutely. Is it going to be worth it for everybody? No. Um, it's not. Um, but that's basically my take on the whole "is it worth it" thing. I've seen a lot of people posting about that, and I wanted to talk about it myself, because, um, worth it is completely dependent on the person. Um, it's not just a general statement. Um, are the components in this camera worth the money that you're paying for it? I would say the technology in it is absolutely. The camera's built really, really well. As small as it is built like a it is built like a brick house. You can't squeeze this thing. You can't. It's metal. The whole thing is metal. So long story short, yeah, it's worth it for me. But like I said, to determine if it's worth it for you, rent it, use it for what your primary usage is, and if it works amazingly, make your decision off of that. I'll leave it at that. You guys have a good day.